Wonderful. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome everyone who's decided to join us this afternoon. My name is Alex Worth, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Quorum. I'm joined today by Darlene Rosenkoetter, the Global Head of Government Affairs and Public Policy in S&P Global, for a conversation on managing public affairs teams while remote. This is part of the webinar series that we are doing in response to COVID-19 of having a series of conversations with public affairs professionals about how their day-to-day is changing as a result of the new world that we live in. And I'm really excited to have Darlene here with us today to talk a little bit about best practices for managing public affairs teams while remote. Before the new reality happened, she managed and does manage an entire international team, and so has lots of experience of being a remote manager and thinking about some of the considerations that go into that. And so very excited to get her thoughts today. What we're going to do is we're going to start off by talking a little bit about how remote workflow has worked for her historically, and then hear about some of her experiences with changes around COVID-19. We'll then talk a little bit about mediums of communication and best practices in terms of talking as a team and communicating manager to direct report. We'll then spend a little bit of time on issues management, as well as sharing information from logging meetings and spreading that across the entire organization. But before we jump in, what we want to do is launch a little bit of a quick poll to just hear from all of you who've joined about what extent did your team work remotely or in disparate offices prior to the coronavirus pandemic. So I think my team's going to help me, and we're going to launch this poll. It should pop right up on your screen. And feel free to select one of those individual ones. We're curious whether or not your team worked a lot and is already spread out across the country, or in some cases the world. Whether a little bit, most of you based in DC and other company headquarters, or if your company has a flexible work policy and many choose to work from home, or something entirely else. So curious to just get a sense. We've got 38% of you that have voted so far, and the number is going rapidly up. But we'll share the results here in about 15 seconds. So we now have 82 individuals who've taken this in total, and looked like from the results that I saw, about 30% said the team is spread out around the country or the world. About 40% said the company has a flexible work policy. And a little bit, and so people chose to work from home on occasion, and then 23% said some based in DC and some based at headquarters. So we've got a good mix of people who have been used to large remote work teams before, and others who this is more new. So I think it'll be a really excellent conversation overall. So thank you for taking the time to share. With that, we're going to jump in, and Darlene, would love to start by hearing from you about how your team works together under normal circumstances, given you've got folks in DC as well as across the entire globe.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay, Alex?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, you're right. So I have a team of people who are based in Beijing and Singapore. I have people over in Europe. So I've been very much used to just engaging and interacting with my entire global team through monthly meetings and calls and other kind of normal business as usual engagements. We use Skype and Zoom and video calls. It's just a regular practice for our team, just to make sure that we have visual connections and connectivity with everyone too. So largely, we haven't had to adapt some of our regular engagements and meetings, but we have a long history of working collaboratively across all these different platforms and tools.
That's great. And yeah, how has your team's workflow changed due to the coronavirus?
So my team in APAC has actually been on work from home since right after the Chinese New Year. So they've really been working from home since January. So in Southeast Asia and China, and then obviously it's been rolling, across Europe and US, and either the whole company or nearly the whole company is on mandatory work from home or strongly recommended work from home. So so it's really it's been a shift, because obviously I run our global government affairs team, and a lot of what we do is so heavily dependent on going out in the market and meeting with people face to face. So we've had to shift that to to more emails, phone calls, webinars, and just a slightly different tact for us to be able to stay connected with folks.
Mm-hmm. And will you expand on that a little bit more in terms of how you've been thinking about changing the way you're connecting with folks, realizing that we don't have the benefit of in-person interactions and events?
Yeah, I mean, we just, I have a lot of benefit just because S&P Global is a data and analytics provider, company. So we have a ton of information around research and economic data, around financial impact of COVID-19. We have supply chain data. So it's really it's enabled us to just go to our policy stakeholders and communicate them probably a little bit less traditionally. We haven't, for many obvious reasons, we haven't been focused on, pandemics and financial impact of pandemics in our prior communications, but it's really allowed us to, establish our credibility and enhance our reputation to say, listen, we have a lot of information that could be valuable to you. We're trying to make sure that we can, get everything to you, make sure that when our webinars are, set up briefings with our analysts and economists. And it's allowed us to have a lot more targeted conversations too. I think, sometimes part of the dance is a little bit of, you spend a little bit of time talking about things that maybe aren't as relevant. And now we're finding that, people don't have a lot of time to spare. You're spending a lot of time on calls all day long. So you really kind of have to get to the point and get to the point quickly on what you're trying to do and accomplish. So it's been really, really interesting. And then as a team, we're also finding that as connected as we were before, it feels like we're actually, becoming a little bit more connected now. We're all checking in on each other a little bit more, having compassion around some of the different situations that people are in. Some people have to take care of their kids, or they're, practically homeschooling their kids, or taking care of elderly people. So it's really changed the whole dynamic of, how we appreciate our colleagues, I think, and see everyone in a new light as well.
So speaking a little bit to your team, how is your team communicating internally? Are you guys doing a weekly call? Are you doing a daily call? What does that look like?
So internally, among our team, or to other stakeholders?
Just among your team.
Okay. So we have weekly calls with my leadership team. I have one-on-one check-ins with my entire team, so all my direct reports and all their direct reports. I do that on a bi-weekly basis. And then I have monthly global team calls. And then, I'm part of a broader public affairs team. So our public affairs team is doing regional check-ins as an entire organization with all of our regional teams too.
Mm-hmm. So I think, a couple of best practices I hear from there. One is the one-on-one and spending really specific time with direct reports. It's something that we do at Quorum and big fans of. But then also that just consistent cadence of you've kept up, it sounds like, from where it used to be. Have you changed it at all with more people working remotely? Are you all doing more internal calls?
It feels like we are. And, some of us have realized too that we feel like we're on even more calls than we were before, which doesn't really seem possible. But so now, one of the best practices that's coming from this is people are trying to carve out time on their calendars where they can actually answer emails or take a breath, take a break and take a walk around the neighborhood or whatever you need to do to kind of recharge. And, because some of us are, especially the leaders and like myself, we're working across several different time zones. The day can start early and it seems like it never ends. So, trying to be mindful about some of these things that we just have to adapt to under this environment.
I find it really interesting that you're feeling that your schedule's gotten busier, even though you've taken out all the external engagement events that come from it. And then out of curiosity for the folks on the webinar, what mediums is your team using internally? You mentioned Zoom. Are you primarily a Zoom team? Is it more Skype? Do you guys have Slack? Is it mostly email? What does that look like?
Oh boy. So we've, as I'm sure many other companies have, we've adapted and evolved and shifted and migrated. So we probably use a little bit of everything, but I think our company was trying to migrate more towards Microsoft Teams, but we use Teams, Skype, Zoom, and we definitely we have a long history of using video chat to just keep in touch and regular contact with people. And then, in Teams, in Microsoft Teams, there's a chat function, and then we have channels. So there's, we have a public affairs channel, but I have a government affairs channel for my whole team, so I can just communicate with them. I try to, it's always a little bit of a balance to try and keep conversation off of email, but it's inevitable at times. But now, everyone's email inboxes are getting crushed. So trying to just use, WhatsApp and text and try and keep some of the conversations off email.
Mm-hmm. Any favorite tips or tricks that you want to share with the audience of how you've used the platforms in maybe an innovative way?
I mean, we're trying to tag things and do a better job about it, just because, so if it's truly an FYI or hashtags, you can just tag the email in the subject line, and that way people know, action needed, or I need help, or, you need to do something, versus, oh, this is just a cool article to read. So I think, the more direction you can give up front, I think it helps everyone.
That's very helpful. I want to transition and talk a little bit about issue management.
Yeah,
your
sure.
team, as I understand it, has used an issue management platform for a while and is fairly progressive and advanced when it comes to issue management, just given the large number of issues and the large number of regions that you all operate in. Can you talk a little bit about that transformation of embracing issues management and what it looks like to use a digital issues management platform?
Yeah, it's super cool. I have to say, we've gone through a massive evolution, and originally my team was tracking everything in an Excel spreadsheet, and that was a little bit of a painful process. It took a lot of time, but now we actually use Quorum as our technology tool, and we use it for everything. So for me, it's really great because it creates transparency across the whole team. So everyone on the whole team can see what other people are doing. I can see what everyone's doing. And then it's really about extracting the data and creating some super cool analytics around it. But we understood, and I understood the value of tracking everything, because it's really difficult sometimes to quantify the return on investment for government affairs officials. You can just say, number of meetings, and that's kind of interesting, but it doesn't really get to, what your actual value is. So, we came up with a whole system, again, originally on Excel, but then we have gotten a lot more sophisticated with it, with, partnering with Quorum and partnering with a technology tool. But we manage all of our internal communications, external communications to policymakers, and then log all of our meetings on this platform. So it's really cool. It's really powerful.
So maybe diving in a level deeper, let's take an issue that's important to you. Say it's, issue X. What types of information are you logging that relates to that issue that you're having your team put in the platform and you're keeping an eye on?
So I'll use COVID-19 just because it's the issue of the day that everyone's probably working on or doing something with. But so we tag everything that someone is working on. So every meeting that you have, a phone call, email, if we set up a webinar, if we set up a briefing for Hill staff or government body, agency, then that meeting is getting recorded. And we also have quality scores that are related to those meetings. So we're trying to, what I was trying to get at is understanding the kind of the quality level of the meeting. If we're the way I envision it is if I look across the whole spectrum of the meetings and I realize that we're only having introductory meetings with, regulators and legislators, then at some point, then, I think it would be more important to advance or elevate some of those meetings. So it just enabled us to be able to look across and say, for my leadership team and for me too, to say, okay, who are we meeting with? Are these the right people? And then you can just start to slice and dice all the data. I can see if my team has had too many touches with one office and we've totally ignored another. I can, slice and dice information by whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's, trade or whatever other issues we're working on. I can see, who we've been meeting with, how many times we've been meeting. I can see if there's been, 200 days since we touched an office that we thought was a really important relationship. And we're for the US, more US specific, we're, tagging all of our PAC meetings and things like that and site visits. So it's really powerful to be able to have all that information in one place. It's really cool.
Indeed. You talked a little bit about proving return on investment, which is obviously something that government affairs folks think a lot about.
Yeah.
And I think you also mentioned something that's important, that it can't just be all about the number of meetings that you do. So how do you think about using the meeting information to help show return on investment besides just we did X number of meetings?
So we're using the Quorum platform to send out like emails and things like that. So I can track open rates. We have a log of all the emails that we've sent. So if we shared like an U.S. economic report, then I can see that the open rate was X%, and then I can track open rates over time. So, for an example, from Q4 2019 to Q1 2020, we have a 6% increase in our open rate for emails that we've been sending. So there's really interesting information that you can extract from things like that. And I think it's helpful to be able to to point to things like that for government affairs.
Indeed, and wonderful to hear that you're seeing even more interest. And I look forward to hearing what that open rate is after you do Q1 and all of your COVID-related materials.
I know.
I can only imagine it's going to go up. I'm curious, Meetings is an information sharing tool. You've had a remote team for many years around the world. Do you find it valuable to be able to see the context of the meetings that your team is having? And has that changed at all now in our COVID-19 world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all just good information and data to have, and it's good to know, where we're spending our time and where we might need to spend more time too. So it's really effective to be able to just look across all the information and really understand, what we're doing. But yeah, absolutely, yeah.
That's helpful. I think so. Curious, what does your team put in the notes for a meeting they've logged? You mentioned the very elaborate tagging system they use. Are they sharing with you additional insight of what's going on, or how have you all chosen to approach that?
Yeah, so we'll put information about, the general context for what the meeting was about, and, what we talked about, if we had leave behind documents, things like that. So it's a really good record for just knowing and understanding, what happened. And, I hate to say it, but in case you ever lose any of your team members for whatever reason, for attrition or whatever reason, it actually establishes that more permanent record, so that you don't have to go back to someone and say, well, what was that meeting about? And it's great to be able to use that to see some of the additional notes and information around what was talked about.
Indeed,
and follow up data too. So there's ways to tag other people on the team. There's ways to do some really interesting things within the platform to make sure that other people see the information too. So it's really great.
I think the other example on that I was also like think about is new team members onboarding. You walk into a new organization, you go, well, who's our relationships with? And, I'm supposed to do House Republicans. Who have we talked to? Right. And being able to go and quickly pull that up is something I end up hearing from clients a lot.
Well, and if you're walking into a meeting, you can just quickly pull up, on the app and just say, oh, my analyst or my so-and-so or CEO just saw you last week. It's great to be able to have that in your pocket.
And now, are you having your team log phone calls and webinars, realizing that we're living in a little bit of a digital world?
Yes, we capture everything. It's we are, and we're trying to, because my team all around the world is, we're setting up briefings, and we're setting up webinars, and we want to be able to get credit for that work too. So yeah.
So I think the webinar piece is really interesting, and something I've started to hear, a few more of government affairs teams doing. Will you walk us through kind of what does one of those webinars look like? How many people do you have on it? Who do you send it out to? What platform are you using to do the webinar on? And then on the other side of that, how are you following up after it and then logging that information?
So we partnered with our events team, who they manage some of the logistics on that. So I probably have to get back to you, but we've used Zoom, and then I can't remember the name of the other platform, but it's all the standard things that I think most people are using. But so we've partnered with our events team on specific events that are already being held, and then we've created a unique login or unique registration link so that government affairs can keep track of the people that we have drove towards those events. And then we've hosted, smaller events that have just been around creating like a couple of our economists and analysts that were answering to specific questions that some, regulatory agencies, government officials would have. So a lot of it has been around the economic impact of COVID-19 on specific sectors and on countries. So, we've been having a lot of those little conversations. And then we use that as an opportunity to just go back and reach out to people and, talk to everyone that we're engaging with. So some of the ones that my team has created have been a little bit more, smaller niche audience, trying to answer to, some of the regulatory agencies and government officials that we've been talking to. And then for, how we've partnered with our commercial and marketing teams is just making sure that we can drive some of our constituents and stakeholders to events that are already being hosted.
I think that's a great best practice for those that are joining the webinar, or for our webinars, to think about how you could do your own and then advertise that out to state, local, federal, as well as administration officials, and get them to come on and join. I'll know one of the things personally is I've even been attending a lot more webinars as I've been sitting at my desk and said, sure, I'll join in. And, if I don't have to get on a plane to go to this conference, I'm happy to listen in. And I think that's a big opportunity that lots of organizations can take advantage of, and it's really wonderful to hear about.
Yeah, and we've been sending invites through we use the Quorum platform, so we can track open rates for all of that as well. That's cool.
Impressive. I want to jump back to meetings real quickly, because I think there's a big question that I often get asked. And that is, how are you able to get your team to actually put their meetings in a system, and any best practices for that?
Yeah, I have to admit, that was probably the hardest thing that I had to do with the team. So it was just the combination of me being vigilant, bringing and me really just bringing it up every single day, not taking no for an answer. I had some outright flat out debates with members of my team from time to time about, and at one point we were actually recording things in the Excel spreadsheet and inputting things into, the Quorum database. So I'm sure you can imagine how happy my team was with me, but it was really important. And so, went from just daily reminders or, regular reminders, and then just naming and shaming when I had to. And I just deployed all the tactics, being nice, being mean, a little bit of everything.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. But it was one of the things that did make it a little bit easier. Some of the more tech savvy people on the team did become some of the early adopters. So then I used them as, peer coaches to really upskill some of the other leaders and people on the team that just hadn't quite adopted yet. And then just continued trainings and, kind of just making sure that people had sort of that iterative training approach too. So it wasn't just one training session, go away, leave, everyone forgets about how to do everything. And then the mobile app is like super cool. So that just makes it super easy too.
Well, I think it also speaks to the importance of having a public affairs leader and the head of the entire office involved and a true champion for it.
Yeah.
And certainly one of the best practices that we talk about is that it's got to come from the top. But I love the point of, you being a champion and then getting the peer coaches as well.
Yeah.
Want to go a little bit kind of back to thinking about team communication and team calls. So many of us are having to run virtual meetings and virtual team calls that used to be in person. Can you share a little bit about, what your weekly or biweekly team calls have looked like and the agenda that you use to make sure that you're getting information from your team?
Yeah, I mean, so like on a weekly basis, I'll have my team just send in, kind of an overall context for what's going on. So, and then we roll up to provide monthly updates and things like that too. So it's probably all iterative a bit too. I'm having these constant conversations. We're all communicating and talking together. And then from time to time, we have working groups and things like that related to specific issues. I think the data alone for, some of the government affairs work doesn't always articulate the story. So, where I'll have my regional leaders and some others on the team just define, what was the thing driving the work that you were doing this month? If it's, we were really trying to get this contract approved, maybe that was the main focus, or, for the week or for the month. Or if you're really working on, building relationships with this a new third-party group, then, some of that stuff just helps define the focus of the work. So, and then for daily calls and weekly calls, I actually don't use an agenda with my team. I try to keep it a little bit more conversational, just so that we can talk and share and let the conversation have a little bit of creative flexibility. I have some, smaller check-ins and huddles where we'll just be quick and things like that too. But I like to just be able to be a little bit more conversational and conversant with the team.
Mm-hmm. On that note, I remember seeing a presentation I think you did probably 2 or 3 years ago about agile public affairs.
Mm-hmm.
How has that worked for you all? And 2 years later, both will you describe for our webinar attendees what that is and what's your current thinking on agile public affairs?
So I think a couple of things. I think, Agile is really meant for like programming, production, workflow. So it's, and a lot of people talk about lean management and Agile. I think the thing to just keep in mind is just take from any of those types of workflow tools and trainings and skills building, the things that really you can apply. So I think one of the things that is that was really good about Agile for me personally is just the concept of setting up 15-minute meetings to the extent you can, or it makes sense, and just having those really quick check-ins with people. It really, thinking of meetings in 15-minute increments rather than 30 minutes in an hour is really helpful. And I told my team never to schedule a meeting that was an hour long, like ever again, because you really just don't need it. So thinking about if you can have 15-minute meeting, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and if you can get it done quicker, then you just get it done quicker.
I think that's a great best practice that people should think about, especially in these digital times. The feeling is that everyone's on more calls. Could we just make them 15 minutes and just super quick?
And the notion, Agile too, is this notion of like a stand-up huddle. So you're actively engaged, you're, standing around, kind of talking about the things that you're working on now, the thing that's blocking you, and really, really getting to trying to solve problems to keep things moving forward. So I think that's, really something great to keep in mind and to practice.
Mm-hmm. So does your team do a stand-up huddle?
I've modified it a little bit. So, you can do like multiple huddles in a week, and then, or you can do less and do them for a little bit longer. I do huddles for some issues that we're managing right now in the US. I have a broader team of people that participate in that. So I do 2 huddles, a longer one on Mondays and a shorter 15-minute one on Fridays.
Yeah, it's something that we've seen internally at Quorum work really well, and I think might have been originally inspired by one of Darlene's presentations, but it's the idea of a daily stand-up and thinking about if we're not going to be in the office and bumping into each other, can you pull people together just for a quick 10 minutes? And what we ask is, what did you work on yesterday that you accomplished? And then what are your biggest priorities for the day? And exactly as you said, are there any obstacles? And it serves as a really helpful way to just bring a team around and be able to get information sharing of, oh, here's what's going on, as well as some socializing, and what can sometimes be a lonely world without the team around. The other places we'll sometimes do them in Slack too. So for my leadership team, instead of doing it in person, we'll do it in Slack or Microsoft Teams you could also use. And that way each person can come in kind of on their own schedule and at least share it. And it means that there's a lot more collaboration and understanding of what team members are working on. But some of our teams definitely have moved to doing it in person and doing it daily during the COVID times to be able to have a little bit more of that social interaction.
That's awesome.
We're going to open it up for Q&A here in a minute. So if you have a question for Darlene, if you just drag your mouse down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little button that says Q&A. And I see we've got a couple submitted, but we would love any questions that are from the audience. But Darlene, as we wrap up, any other best practices that you want to share with the audience today on working from home and managing remote teams?
The other thing I didn't really talk about is we've actually tried to sprinkle in some fun. So we do like team happy hours and things like that. So it's a little overwhelming, but I think some of the, we actually have like a public affairs yoga session, and we do some coffee chats and things like that. But the happy hours have gotten really fun. So, so I'm sure everyone's experimenting with all this kind of stuff. But I think, you know, humanizing all of this and having a little bit of fun is good to keep in mind too.
That's great. And so you've been doing fun over Skype and Zoom?
Yeah, we use Teams because you can see multiple people. We've used Zoom and even FaceTime too. So yeah.
That's very fun. And I think another just good reminder of that, you know, when we can't do those happy hours, can you do team events? I've heard of people doing Zoom barbecues where everyone goes out and barbecues independently. But also even just something as simple as happy hour of like get a drink and, you know, sit on video chat. It seems almost a little foreign sometimes, but it's been a really wonderful way to build some of those engagements.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, before we turn into Q&A, just a quick reminder, tomorrow at 3 p.m., this same link, we're going to be talking about lobbying from home, how to adjust your congressional outreach strategy during social distancing. And we have Rich Gold, who's the head of the government affairs practice at Holland & Knight, joining us. So this would be a really interesting conversation on the other side of this. Instead of managing a team, what does it look like to lobby from home, especially with Capitol Hill, which is currently closed to the public. So I would invite you to join us tomorrow at 3. But with that, we want to open it up to Q&A. So again, if you come down to the bottom left and click question and answer and submit your Q&A, I'm going to work to try and find all of the questions that have been submitted here.
There's like a little button up top that says Q&A. Can you see it?
I can see it. But it is not popping up for some reason for me.
I can see them.
Can you see them?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we'll just turn it over to you to self-moderate. Take it away, Darlene.
Okay. I'll tick through with Darlene. Would I be able to share an example of my team's notes? I assume that's the notes that we're putting into Quorum. I'm happy to follow up maybe offline to give you an example. So I'm happy to do that.
Perfect. I also now have the Q&A too, so I can read them for you to be a part of it.
Okay, cool.
So from an attendee, what is the cadence of your team for logging information in Quorum? We've encountered challenges in getting government affairs, public affairs colleagues to enter their meetings, calls, et cetera, on a consistent basis. Any tips for getting everybody on board to submit the data?
We're trying to do it immediately. I think, you know, the closer to the meeting that you can do it, the better. So, so actually even just using the app to record meetings in the cab or in the walk out of the meeting has been pretty highly successful. The longer you wait, the more you probably lose some of their memory of what happened and who was there and things like that. So I think, you know, the soonest that you can do it, and it doesn't take that long if you just, once you get into the habit of it, then the better it works.
Mm-hmm. The next question somebody asked is, how much time does your team spend daily or weekly on reporting? This is the bane of everyone's existence. No one wants to do it, but it's a necessity.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I don't know how to articulate this super clearly, but just anecdotally, I ran a whole global report, and you know, I have someone on my team that helps do that because he's just better at he's quicker at being able to pull all the data back out. But once the information's in Quorum, it's like minutes to pull together, you know, a several page slide deck. So, you know, I have like a word cloud based on the issues. I have everything broken down by business division. I have the open rates on all the stats and emails that I'm sending. And it's like, it's super cool, it's visual. So it literally takes, once you have the information all in, it takes minutes to get it back out.
That's impressive. And if you had to maybe estimate the amount of time that one of your team members spends putting information into a system or reporting a week, what do you think that looks like?
It just depends on what else is going on, but I don't know, maybe like I don't know, maybe 30 minutes per person per week or an hour. I mean, it's once you get into the habit of it, it doesn't really take that long to do it. So it's like, a couple minutes per meeting. And it just might depend on, the rigor of what you're actually recording. But, we're trying to record everything. So like emails and phone calls and briefings and things like that. It's not a heavy lift in the grand scheme of things. And like the report that you can pull and you can send to your executives is just, it looks so cool. And it looks like, for me, it looks like that, we're taking this seriously and we can speak the language of the business back to the business. So it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think when you really think about it as 30 minutes a week out of a 40-hour, maybe 50-hour work week, that just really doesn't seem that much. And so oftentimes I think, we all can be tempted that if we think of reporting as a bigger thing than it is, oh, it's going to be so much time data inputting, when it's really like, no, it's not as much, it's as much time as maybe somebody or I spend reading the New York Times in a given day, in a given week. So
yeah. And if people can't do it immediately, then just like carve out 20 minutes in your day to just go back through and record it. But I think, the more immediate is just better practice.
So next question, also on the lines of meetings, is how do you measure the impact of different meetings?
So we have different components that we're looking at, but I think there's multiple different ways that you can do it. So you can record whether or not the meeting was positive, neutral, or negative. And then we have these quality scores that we came up with just because it was just interesting to look at. So we're looking at like the seniority of the person we're meeting with, how influential we think they might be able to be in the broader context of helping us on some of our issues. And we have a key and to our scoring system, and then everyone on the team has those same parameters in mind, and we self-score. So I think there's just multiple different ways to do it. The positive, neutral, negative is really interesting too, and I think we're going to be trying to record. I haven't asked the team to do that before, but we just talked about it recently, and I think we think it's going to be really valuable to understand that data as well, around like the sentiment.
Mm-hmm. The other scoring system that I really like for stakeholders is measuring the relationship. And the best practice that I've seen done is done it by the description. So knows our team, knows our issues,
right.
Is supportive of our issues, and willing to take action on our behalf. And it gives a really clear definition for self-scoring, where it's like, all right, does the person do that? And then it lets you report on the number of people that you've moved up that engagement ladder over time in a really impactful way of saying, hey, we've got 100 champions who are willing to support us on a given issue. Or, hey, we've got 300 people that know our team from people that we didn't know. And I think that's going to be even more important when we see a whole new Congress come in here in the next 10 months or so.
It's really interesting too, something that we've noted from the work from home, it's really the power of the networks of the team that have enabled people, I think, to be so successful. So it's so important to have those relationships, and it's really interesting to be able to demonstrate that too. It's not very easy to get someone's attention when there's all this stuff going on, but when people have these pre-existing relationships and relationships that you've owned and worked on maybe for decades or years or whatever, it becomes really powerful, especially in moments like these.
Mm-hmm. Next question that we got is, does your organization engage in grassroots advocacy? If so, do you have non-staff advocates log interactions in Quorum as well?
So we don't do as much on grassroots, so I'm probably not as well situated, but you probably have some more experience on that side, Alex. And I haven't to date, I haven't been recording, I haven't had non-staff record data information in here. So I know I have talked to some other peers that do that, and I know that can be like super effective too. I just haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah. The best practice that we usually see is for folks that are running ambassador programs. Well, they'll try and do a grass tops and have a grassroots ambassador. And then if you have, 100 of those key advocate program, we've also heard them called, across the country, then there's the ability to go in and have those people say, okay, we want you to do X number of in-district visits and go out and go meet the member of Congress, go to their, coffee with your congressman, and then report that information back. And so that's where we see it work best. Obviously, there's opportunities for people to log, anecdotal interactions of, oh, I saw my member of Congress at the grocery store. But really, it's the more sustained programs and grass tops that are super valuable. The other one that I love just to throw out is doing relationship surveys. And so the one that we really would encourage is where people that are non-staff are logging in the relationships that they have with elected officials, because you never know, whose sons are on the same little league team or who goes to church together that are already in your network. And if you have a grassroots advocacy program, my favorite tip is to go and auto-direct the conclusion of each campaign to the relationship survey. So if you get somebody to take action, ask them to do one more thing and just say, hey, by the way, do you know anyone? And all of that information can then feed back into that same database that Darlene's already looking at as you're trying to get a sense of, okay, here is the total of relationships and our interactions with the given legislator. Next question, this is the last question that's been submitted. So if anyone else has a burning one, please feel free to join and share it. Again, just drag your mouse to the bottom of the screen and click Q&A. But it reads, thanks for all these tips. My question is related to appetite for non-COVID related work, business as usual. How have you found policy and government stakeholders' appetite to discuss real work, and how many are interested in dialing into your events, webinars, etc.? We are struggling with discussing biz while also wanting to show sensitivity to the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's just been different across different geographies. So in Europe, we have some pending consultations that are open. So it is a lot of business as usual work over there, in addition to the COVID related questions and things that we're getting. So it's just been a balance. In the US, I think, Congress was probably a little bit more hyper-focused on COVID as they were working through all these different packages. And even, some of our regulators, they just want to hear more about what's happening in the markets and, what the financial impact is. So we're fielding a lot of questions around that. I think it's probably going to ebb and flow in the beginning, depending on what region you're in. Folks are probably going to be more hyper-focused on COVID, and then they'll turn their attention back to business as usual. So we're starting to get some of the business as usual questions again. And then, in depending on the different regions, but I think that's probably a tricky one too. You have to gauge your audience. You have to, gauge the person that you're trying to reach out to. And if you know that they're super sidetracked on trying to solve a problem, and your question and your insights aren't going to really help them solve that problem, then it's probably not the right time to go and reach out. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, we still have, in addition to all the COVID related work, we have a lot of ongoing issues and things that we're trying to manage. And, so we're keeping up that work on those areas as well.
Out of curiosity, in the conversations that you've been having, Darlene, have you felt that staffers and your stakeholders now have a little bit more time in some areas now that some of the first relief efforts have passed of the first 3 phases? Or is it still, all COVID all day, every day?
It's definitely mixed. I mean, yeah, I think people, and one of the things that we noticed are, it seems like people do have a little bit more time to pay more focused attention to issues and things too. So it just probably depends on who you're talking to and dealing with. And then as it relates to the webinars, I mean, we've driven probably about 350 people who are all, policy stakeholders to webinars that we've been hosting. So it's a pretty significant number. So that means, people are definitely really interested in some of these topics. And then, we have like a landing page dedicated to all the information that we're hosting. We've rolled out we're releasing some of our data for free to government agencies and to hospitals around supply chain for PPEs. So there's a lot of cool stuff that we're doing that we're just trying to make sure that that people understand, in addition to all the other things that we're doing.
Wow, significant. 2 more questions that we have here. One is, how do you manage note taking?
So I mean, we try to be pretty. What's the word? We try not to have too long of notes, because the unstructured data like that probably it doesn't really help you that much if it's not as queryable, searchable, slice and diceable. So to the extent you can, think about like how to reduce the fields into, the most kind of unique data points, I think that's probably a little bit more helpful than like the open flow text. The text is just the additional context for, maybe what you talked about, or maybe some of the follow-ups or things like that that you want to know about the meeting. But I think the more important part is to figure out all the different component parts of, it's almost like, visualizing like that Excel spreadsheet, but all the different other component parts that you want to keep track of. If you are trying to track, I have different business divisions that I'm accountable to. So, it's important to be able to say, oh, for my S&P Jones Indices division, I've had, X number of meetings across these different regions, or I can see that in one region, I'm spending a lot of time on one business division and another region in another. Or, sometimes it might just be interesting if you're tracking across states, what states you're spending the most time, having the most meetings, things like that. So, so for me, the notes haven't been as important just because that in that free flow text, it's a little bit difficult to kind of track some of the information.
Mm-hmm. And then the other side of that, when you do meetings and your weekly team meeting and your one-on-ones, are you taking notes in those meetings, and how are you managing those notes?
So I'll take some notes if it's like high level. I'm not, I think sometimes people take verbatim notes and then you share them around and no one ends up reading them. So if there's just like a couple of quick bullets or takeaways that I have, then I'll record that, send an email, or, I use email and kind of, I also run like a bulletin board to-do list. It's through Microsoft Planner, but so if I have to-dos and things like that, it's like this virtual to-do list bulletin board where I'll keep things like that.
Very cool. Last question that we have that I think is a wonderful way to end this is, what do you think are the 3 key ways, in summary, to manage a team most effectively during COVID? Just to summarize, was the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think just patience, open communication, and just constantly communicating is those are probably some of the 3 best ones. But just making sure that you're actually checking in with people and having those real actual conversations, like how are you, what's going on, what can I help you with? I've noticed that people on my team are in lots of different situations, and there can, sensitivities may run high as you're getting more stressed out from one area of your life or another. But yeah, just the constant communication, checking in, and patience.
I think those are 3 great ways to end it: patience, open communication, and constant communication. Yeah. Well, Darlene, a big thank you for joining us and sharing what your team has been doing and some best practices. We really do appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this. We hope to see you tomorrow, also 3 o'clock, on strategies for lobbying from home with the good folks over at Holland & Knight. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.